We have 4 absolutely amazing guest speakers. How this will work is we'll do our intros, then we will have, oh, come on in.
Hello, Steve.
I think we'll just go in order after our introductions. We'll have Bill show an item and kind of talk a little bit. And then if there's somebody in the audience that wants to show one of their items, then they can talk about it. Then we'll go to Terry, then we'll go to the audience, then we'll go to Mike, audience, Amanda, etc. I'm so excited. Okay, so just a little bit of history. Don't worry, it's very short. I know you're not here to hear me talk, you're here to hear these excellent speakers. So, Bill Schultz is the president of the Nipple County Historical Science Society. He also runs the Old Jail Museum. If people have not been, we cannot recommend it enough. The library went on a field trip and it was absolutely amazing. There are all kinds of flyers and we'll put them over here. Make sure you grab one on your way out. Next we have Terry Housholder. Terry is the only one that gave me an introduction, which I loved and appreciate. Terry.
My wife wrote it, I think.
Oh, thank you, Grace. It made my job so much easier. Terry Housholder is a Noble County native whose family settled near Avila in 1836. He's president of KPC Media, a company he has been affiliated with since he was in high school. He is the author of 150 Years of Kendallville, and it was published in 2013. We have so many times where people come to the local history center upstairs, and anytime they're stuck, we're like, please take a look at 150 Years of Kenneville, and then they want to buy it, and then we email Terry and say, is this available for sale?
I brought some books tonight.
So he does have some available to sell, which is great. Mike Mapes comes by his love of history naturally. He's the son of Arthur Franklin Mapes, and he has quite an amazing collection of postcards, which we'll be sharing this evening. Anything else you want to add?
No, other than I've got lots of things besides postcards. Anything paper, I've got.
Perfect.
He has an anniversary coming up, his 50th class reunion, which is mine and Grace's. We were in the same class together.
I love that.
We're having our 60th.
Ah, good, Jill.
Amazing.
I would like to say that Terry's beautiful book, that he asked me to use some of my postcards and stuff, and I'm proud to say that out of maybe 450 pictures in that book, about 200 of them were from me. So.
That's amazing.
It wouldn't have been as nice a book without Mike.
That is amazing. Yeah, that's really cool. And then last but most certainly not least, Amanda Blackman is a local historian who's written books on the Anderson brothers as well as the old Kenneville Cemetery. She was nice enough to do a library field trip for us. How long ago was that? It was at least 3 or 4. We should definitely do one again. I know currently she's busy because she's working on the updated version of
The Kenneville family in their homes.
She was just
By
telling me
Jean
she
Coker.
has the scrapbook from.
Jean Coker's scrapbook. It has a lot of her original photographs in it.
Okay, now I'm done. Bill, go ahead. No pressure.
Put me in the coals
No
first.
pressure. So just, if you want to show 1 or 2 of your items, that would be great.
Yep. Well, that's all I've got.
Great.
I've got
Perfect.
Gatorade and some jello. So that's what I have. Yeah, they brought a lot. I brought stories. So I'm going to title this one here, He Never Brought It Home. He never brought it home. So let's put it up here. We all know what it is, right? We won't get it out yet. Well, it's not what you think. So there's a farm south of Skinner Lake, about a mile. And if you look at, I'm sure you've all looked at those plat books this week, right? You've been studying them. In 1914, that plat book, there's a plot of land there that was owned by William Zimmerman. William Zimmerman had a sister, Catherine, and but this William lived at this 41 acres. If we go back up a little bit to the 1893 plat book, that plot of land there is a little bigger. It's about 100 acres, I'm guessing. And the name under that is Mary Zimmerman. That's Mary Zimmerman's farm. If we go to the 1874 plat book, It's bigger yet. I'm gonna guess 300 to 400 acres. And Mary had it then also. It was her farm. So that's the simple little background of that. I've got some letters. We printed these up. We have the actual letters in the museum of the jail. And so I want to read you these letters a little bit here. So let's go back to 1865. That kind of gives away a lot of it right there. We all know what happened in 1865. But this letter, dear husband, I looked for a letter from you last Wednesday, but did not get one, and was some disappointed. GIT is how she said that, or wrote it. Now I look for one tomorrow. I have nothing new to write tonight, only that there are well, and hope this will find you enjoying the same state of health. As soon as I hear that you get the money I sent you through Mr. Prentice, I will send you some more if I can get it. I will send small dribs, then if it gets lost, it won't be so much. Collecting money is slow business for me. If I get any work done, they look for the money right straight, but when I need it, it doesn't come in very fast. Jim Conklin promised to bring me that long ago. He has forgot all about it again. I'm spinning my wool now. I will soon be done, I hope. I have spun as high as 5 skeins today that goes fast in the line of spinning. The neighbors are all well except Mother MC. She has been sick for 2 days, and I have wrote all that I can think of now, so I must close my letter. Well, Mary had a husband, and she's writing to her wife, she's writing to her husband, I should say, and that guy is John Zimmerman. John Zimmerman and Mary owned that property back in 1865. And so this kind of tells a lot of the story right here in John's letter to his wife. That first letter was in August of 18. And I have actually another letter that's from March. And so his letter's on August 18th. Dear wife, received yours today and acknowledge the receipt of $10 and a letter by Nelson Prentice. I also received a letter from you at the same time. Was glad to hear you were all well. In your letter, you complain of some money being hard to get. The money must come, $10 a week, until I am well. I don't know whether my fever is broke yet or not. I remain your affectionate husband. I accept another letter here, but we'll save that for later. So what do we have here? There's John's Civil War sword.
Wow.
John Zimmerman was mustered in as a private and mustered out as a second lieutenant with the 152nd Indiana Infirmary Company B. The regiment was organized in Indianapolis, gathered in March of 1865. They proceeded to Harper's Ferry, Virginia, Charleston, Stevenson Station, Summit Point, Clarksburg, West Virginia, until August. When Zimmerman mustered out in August of 1865 from West Virginia, he tragically died 2 days later in Cincinnati on his way home. So all of his equipment. So how did most those people die in the Civil War? And so that's just the tragic end to a lot of stories. How many stories are like that of those Civil War people? So John we've got other letters, we've got some more of his things, but you thought you had a gun in here, and a gun is one thing, but to me a sword is just a little more personal. That's his personality right there, or just what does that sword tell? So he never carried it home. There it is. Thank you.
Who wants to be our first audience participant? Karen? Great. I mean, perfect. No pressure.
Now, they supposed to guess or?
Yeah, so you can hold it up, and actually if you want to come up and kind of just walk it by them, and they can take a quick look, and then if they want to huddle together, or if anybody knows right away, they can
I
take
think
a
this
guess.
is the only reason she brought me along.
It's a golden shovel.
I guess that won't fit on the document, yeah.
That's bronze, right?
Brass, I think. Yeah. So it had a special use. If anybody knows what that is.
A parade shovel.
I'm sorry?
A parade?
A parade shovel, no?
A cemetery shovel or some,
It wouldn't spark.
you're exactly
Groundbreaking.
He's
No, so it
right.
wouldn't make a dust explosion maybe in a grain
Oh,
elevator.
okay.
Or shoveling.
Yeah, we were told it was to shovel gunpowder.
That
Oh,
makes
So it
sense.
wouldn't
Yeah,
spark.
yeah.
And with it being painted red, that would kind of tell you to warn, as a warning, I would guess. But it's supposed to be a gunpowder shovel.
Where did
He
you
says
get
they
that?
make them out of plastic.
Where did I get it? I don't remember.
Do you know where it was used?
I do not. I probably might if I remembered where we got it. So,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being our first willing participant. No
but
pressure.
thank her for volunteering.
It was Kenneville High School colors, so I thought, oh, is that from Kenneville High School?
No, sorry.
Red and the grass.
Okay, Terry, do you want to show
Okay.
some of your items?
I have a lot of different things. I don't want to bore you to death, but I thought this is one of the more interesting things that I have. This is a picture, and I have some printouts, and let me pass.
Oh, here.
I think I have just 3 printouts, and I highlighted some of the names that I'm going to talk about here. But this is from 1914 in Kenneville. And basically, this was most of the businessmen in Kenneville at the time. And there's a few folks that I could do bios on probably 90% of these people. But this was given to me actually by Russell Frazee. I think he also gave one to the public library. I think the library has a copy of this. But he typed up all the names of these people on it, and he thought, I guess the downtown business should have this. So this is actually at the New Sun. It's not my property, but he gave it to me, and I said, well, I would put it up on display at the New Sun. So let me tell you about a few of the people. I could go on and on, but I won't. A couple of the gentlemen in here, unfortunately, there are no women. There should have been, obviously, some women who were the backbone of some of these men in the next generation, but back in 1914, they thought of the Businessmen's Association, I guess. A couple guys, one's in the picture there that I pointed out is Amos Ray Otis, who was a Kendallville druggist. He was born in Dalton, Ohio in 1868. He lived in Hicksville and then Defiance, and then he entered the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy, where he studied for just 1 year. He worked in Brooklyn, New York, and then he came to Kendallville, where he worked for G.H. Lohman. If you go downtown, you can still see the Lohman print in the sidewalk there. In 1894, he opened one of the finest drugstores in Northeast Indiana. That was, of course, in Alford's book, and that was all, flowery wording about being the finest drugstore. He became one of Kenneville's most famous merchants. In February 21st, 1895, the first telephone line in Kenneville was opened at Otis Drugstore. And in 1898, Kenneville had an exchange, a phone exchange of 13 subscribers. And then Otis and several other businessmen in town started the Citizens National Bank in Kenneville in 1924. Another banker that I point out there in the picture is Abe Jacobs. He was born in Kenneville In 1864, the son of Moses Jacobs. At the age of 8, he was taken to Darmstadt, Germany, where he was educated. His family, they were Jewish people, folks, and they took their son back to Europe, and they decided he should be kind of educated there. So the family returned to the U.S. in 1882, and Abe went on to college in Chicago. Then he accepted a position with J. Keller Company of Kendallville, and later was associated with Jacob Keller, who started the Noble County Bank and Trust in Kenneville. Abe Jacobs married the boss's daughter. That's kind of familiar to me. I sort of married the boss's daughter too. Anyway, this was Nanette Keller. Jacobs served on the city council for a number of years, and he became president of the bank upon the death of Jacob Keller in 1909. Abe Jacob died unexpectedly in July 1925 and is buried in the Jewish section of the Oak Park Cemetery in Ligonier. Upon Abe's death, then his brother Samuel Jacobs was named president of the Noble County Bank and Trust in Kenneville. And if you bear with me, I want to tell you a little story. There were 3 banks during the Great Depression in Kenneville at the time. 2 of them went bankrupt. So if you let me, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story of the 2 bankrupt banks. And the 2 of the 3 banks that existed in the early 1930s collapsed during the Great Depression, resulting in tragic suicide, jury trials, convictions, and financial ruin for many. The Noble County Bank and Trust at 112 South Main Street closed on January 10th, 1931. The Citizens National Bank at 101 North Main Street closed on February 13th, 1932. Each bank's board of directors ordered the closure of the insolvency after insolvency was determined. So 2 bank failures in Kenneville resulted in great unease in the community, which negatively impacted Campbell and Feder Bank. But CNF was never in financial trouble and survived the Great Depression. After the week-long National Bank holiday declared by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on March 6, 1933, Campbell and Feder reopened on March 15, 1933, with a Class A rating by the federal bank examiners. Now, the Citizens National Bank was the smallest bank in the city with deposits of $543,000 as of December 31st, 1931. The bank was founded in December 1924, as I mentioned, by Amos R. Otis, who served as president. This is interesting. One of the bank's vice presidents was W.C. Allman, who was mayor of Kendallville at the time. Another name that you may know, H.H. McCumber was a vice president. He was manager of Clinton Walling. And then there were others, including Doc H.O. Williams, who I'll talk about later. One of the most interesting things that happened at the bank in its history was it was robbed in October 16, 1931. The only bank robbery downtown Kendallville in its history. And they were John Dillinger copycats. Wasn't the Dillinger gang who robbed the Stroh Bank and robbed the police station in Auburn and a few other places. But anyway, they were copycat robbers. They were eventually caught. So the Citizens National Bank closed on February 13, 1932, after continuous weeks of withdrawals by customers who were fearful of the continued bad economic news around the country. Everybody obviously knew what was happening, and all the people who were going bankrupt in New York and elsewhere. So people would come into the bank and just withdraw their money. So officials at Citizens National Bank said a steady withdrawals together with the hoarding of funds resulted in the bank's demise. The bank was able to eventually pay back its customers the losses they incurred with the sudden closure. So that was a good story about Citizens. There's a bad story about the Noble County Bank and Trust. It's much more complicated and much more tragic. The Noble County Bank was founded in September 1889 as a private bank with Jacob Keller as the first president and then Abraham M. Jacobs as the first cashier. Mr. Jacobs is in that picture. Keller and Jacobs' father, Moses Jacobs, were prominent German Jewish immigrants who came to Kendallville in the 1860s. And then Jacobs founded Keller and Company, one of the most important mercantile businesses in Kendallville. In 1891, the bank was incorporated. Jacob Keller died in November 1909 at the age of 71, and then Abraham Jacobs became the president. And if you know where the neoclassical building of the Art Nouveau location is at 212 South Main Street. Does everybody know where that is? It's kind of, I don't think anybody's occupying that right now. It used to Kendall Depot, later went into there. And I
Across
think
the
they all,
street from Home Sweet Home Flowers.
what is it?
Across the street from Home Sweet
Yeah,
Home
across the
Flowers.
street, yeah. On the
You
west.
can, you can see where they covered up the Noble County Trust up on the top.
Oh, really?
When that went out of
I've
business.
never noticed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guy Sportslander used to tell me about when he was a little boy, he remembers when that bank closed.
Yeah.
People were lined up outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was, Kendall Depot took it over, and
Yeah.
then when they built their new building, that's where they moved in.
Yeah.
In 1929, the Noble County Bank absorbed the Kenneville Trust and Savings, and later changed the name then to the Noble County Bank and Trust. As I mentioned, Jacobs died unexpectedly, and then his brother took over, Samuel Jacobs of New York City, who had amassed a large fortune in real estate dealings. He was named president of the Noble County Bank and Trust. In 1927, Samuel Jacobs of New York City drew national attention when he bought the General Motors building in New York City for $12 million, giving him the distinction of owning the largest building other than any other in the country as an individual. And he later sold the building for $15 million. So he made a nice little profit there. Samuel Jacobs' finances were severely damaged in the Wall Street crash in 1929. As a result, Jacobs' mental and physical health deteriorated. And by 1930, the bank he presided over in Kendallville was in deep trouble. The bank's board of directors realized the major shrinkage of values of the bank's real estate collateral and ordered the bank to be closed on January 10, 1931. The announcement was made by Milton Jacobs, the son of Abraham Jacobs, and the nephew of the bank's president, Samuel Jacobs. A month after the closure, the bank was determined to be insolvent by the Citizens Committee, headed up by Elmer E. McRae, president of McRae Refrigerator Company. And then there were several other members of the local committee, including some of the names you might know. R.S. Emmerich, who was an attorney, I think Dan Emmerich's, would that be his grandfather or father? Grandfather, I guess. C.H. Kimmel, owner of the Kenneville Laundry, and others. R.J. Raywinkle, who then was associated with McRae Refrigerator. A judge appointed Abe Meyer, president of the American State Bank and Ligonier, as the bank receiver. But the Citizens Committee and the public were opposed to Meyer's appointment, possibly because of his past friendships with the Jacobs family. Both families were prominent German Jewish citizens of Noble County. Meyer resigned from his post within a week after more than 400 people signed petitions opposing his appointment. Kenneville attorney Vermont Finley then appointed a bank receiver. I'm not going to read all of this, but anyway, what ends up happening is that Samuel Jacobs had the local bank send him $100,000 because he had all these debts in New York City. So they sent him a check for $100,000. And it was determined eventually that Samuel Jacobs owed the bank more than $350,000. There was a grand jury called, and there was indictments in not only was Jacobs, but also some of the folks who worked at the bank. In mid-March, a Noble County grand jury was called to investigate the closing. On March 31st, 1931, Lord McCartney, 44, Secretary-Treasurer of the bank, committed suicide at Bixler Lake, hanging himself from the clothesline on the diving board of the lake. He left a suicide note addressing one of them to the Kenneville News-Sun. In it, he claimed to be innocent of any wrongdoing. The strongest, he is quoted as saying in his suicide note, the strongest proof of my honesty is that I was completely wiped out, along with many others. My implicit faith and confidence in the ability and the integrity of Samuel Keller Jacobs, the note read. Long story, I have the whole story in the book if you want to read the rest of it. The sad thing is Samuel Jacobs never went on trial. He fled off to Europe. By the time they got him back, his health had deteriorated and he died. And he had this wonderful funeral in New York City where I have the eulogy that they spoke highly of him as a great man. Although they didn't ask anybody from Kendallville what they thought of Samuel Jacobs. Anyway, that's a story. I could go on, but folks have a lot of other things to share. But there's some more bios that I'll read if we have time. So.
Yeah, I think this will be perfect. Is there a Craig? Does Craig have an item?
Craig.
Oh, great. Okay. Craig, do you want to come up?
This was at a prominent place in Kenneville.
Maybe right here.
No. And I believe it was probably made at McCrae's, too. This was on the corner of Mitchell and Main Street, the northwest corner. It was up high on a girder. And about 20 years ago, when they were replacing all the traffic signals, I asked someone on the street department what they're going to do with that sign. And they said, what sign? So we haven't seen it. And then about a half hour later, it showed up at my door. So that's all I got. So, and they had an enameling shop at the McCrae factory. So they often made things like this in that shop. My mother had a coffee table that someone had made there in the enameling lab. It was checkerboard. It was for outdoors on her patio. So that's what that is. I think the statute of limitations are expired on
Do any of our panelists have any little interesting stories about McCrae or anything that
Yeah.
people might not? Yeah.
Maybe all of us.
Anybody? Yeah. I'll jump in.
Yeah. Well, Elmer McCrae, one of the more interesting things, maybe Amanda could tell about the wedding, but I won't get into that.
Please do, Amanda, after.
But Elmer McCrae, it was called Lakeside Hospital before they remodeled it. And Elmer McCrae, I think, gave about 1/4 of the money to build McCrae Memorial Hospital. I think it was like $25,000 is all he gave. But anyway, they needed to cut. But he was very beloved by his employees. And when he died, his daughter, married a candor from the Coca-Cola family in Atlanta. So she ended up well from that side of the family. Unfortunately, none of it ever came back to Kenneville. I remember many years later when they was trying to do some fundraisers, they kind of contacted the Candler family in Atlanta. They didn't really want to have anything to do with Kenneville. But anyway, Elmer McCrae was very well liked. And he died actually in Atlanta unexpectedly. I think he'd been ill for a year. He was 77 years old. Anyway, they brought his body back to Kenneville on a train, and then hundreds of friends and employees and business associates paid respects to him at his home. Everybody knows where the home is, on Mitchell Street. And the day of his funeral on Sunday, January 2nd, 1938, all 300 employees walked from the McRae factory to his home, and the trustees and the employees of the Lakeside Hospital did likewise. And the Kenneville Police and the Indiana State Police formed an honor guard to the burial procession at Lakeview Cemetery. And so he left a wonderful legacy. But I don't know, Amanda, you want to tell about the wedding?
I don't actually know a whole lot except for her name was Sarah, and they had this grand reception and
At the home.
yeah, at the home, and people were like peering in the fence to like watch all these rich people from Atlanta. I think one of the more interesting things about Elmer McRae is that how he got into the business. His father and him had a business selling milk and eggs and butter. And Homer, Elmer's dad, got really concerned about possibly accidentally giving someone food poisoning. And so he actually had a patent for refrigeration. And then when he passed away, Elmer took that patent and started a refrigeration factory. So.
At its height, I think 1/3 of the families in Kendallville were supported by a McRae refrigerator company. So it was a very important part of Kendallville's history.
On our library field trip to Jean Strapp Quarter just last week, we did get to see the McRae refrigerator in the house there. So, and we also saw one, and Jenna and I went to a conference for our
Springfield, Illinois.
And the Frank Lloyd Wright House had a McRae. We were very excited, and the tour guide was like, "Okay, calm down."
We may have illegally taken photos.
Okay, Mike, do you want to share a couple of your items, and then we'll.
Yeah, I'll start first with going back to some of the things that Terry talked about. There's a postcard of the Nipple County Bank, in case anybody wasn't sure which building that was uptown. It's probably one of the most impressive buildings there. And this is what the interior used to look like. And one other story about that bank failure, Lauren McCartney was well known and well respected in Kendallville, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons he took that so hard. But he had a small orchestra called Mac's Band, and I don't have it with me, but I've got probably a 10 by 14 foot fold out flyer that he mailed out to people, and it's got a neat picture of him and his orchestra and stuff. But places like the Elks in Kendallville, I have advertisements from them where they were advertising you're going to have a dance for Thanksgiving or whatever, and a lot of them say featuring Mac's Band, and so it was really crushing to his pride, I'm sure, that he just couldn't handle it. But I've been collecting Kenneville postcards since the mid 1970s, and I have probably, well, I know I do. I have 571 Kenneville postcards so far, and but this is one that I got recently, and this was number 541. So I used to get a lot of postcards. I might get 20 or 30 or 40 a year, but now I don't get that many. But this one was really interesting to me. I saw this card on eBay, and I got to looking at it, and I know it's not real sharp there, but I looked at this one gentleman on the corner, and I thought, that looks like my grandfather. And sure enough, I bought the card, bid on it, and got to looking at it closer. And there's my grandfather, and my grandmother beside him, and then there's my Uncle Raymond Acker, that was Alva Acker and Mignon Acker, and my Uncle Raymond and Raymond's wife Evelyn, or Evie as we called her, But then I got to looking closer, and I thought, that's Mom right there crossing the street. I thought, what are the odds? You know, I collected 540 postcards, and I got this one that had my mother and my grandparents on, and it was a nice surprise. And this one is the oldest image I have of Kenneville. This is a 1871 Kenneville Juvenile band, and it's taken on Main Street at the corner of Main and Rush, looking north. I was talking about that picture with my mom's family, and this postcard was handed down in the family. This is my grandfather with a team of mules pulling a log at the John Diabley sawmill. And the bridge behind him there is the old wooden bridge on South State Street. And so the Diabley Creek is behind them. And on the north side of the creek, the land is a lot higher than on the south side. That's why that bridge shoots out so high. And I figure this was probably taken around 1914 or 1915. And you can't really see it here, but if I blow this up on a computer and try to enhance it some, there's a building back here. And that building was the old McRae milk, creamery where they sell milk and eggs and things like that. And in later years, it was the Bayer Brothers grocery company moved into that building after I've got an advertisement at home from 1884, and McRae's were on the corner of Mitchell and Oak Street in the south, in the southeast corner. And that's where they were until they built their own factory. And then just show it to you that this is an advertising postcard for chapels. I assume that's the pronunciation. It could have been chapels. I'm not sure. Of their hearse, and they were downtown. I believe maybe in the old Kelly Hotel building, which later became Ads Furniture and then Kenneville. But I've got just so many postcards, I could spend hours going through them. One of the other things that
Do you have the interurban one?
yes.
I think that's a cool one.
Next thing I'll show, that this isn't a postcard, but it's a catalog from about 1920, the Noble Motor Truck Corporation. Their engine, radiator.
Who started that, Mike? Nipple.
It was C.J. Mutton and some others. Mutton came to Kenneville because of the interurban. And he was into a lot of things, and he became a state senator while he lived here in Kenneville.
And it was the first president of the Kenneville Rotary.
Yeah, he was very active in a lot of things.
Wake everybody up.
But they never made small trucks. Everything was big, large. I think
I can-
ton and a half up to 5
I can
tons.
tell another tragic story about Clarence Mutton. I have it I wrote the history of the Kenneville Rotary Club, I think, in the library.
But you can, yes, all those books up there are books that you can check out, and we do have one of the Rotary right there behind Bill. So
Yeah,
if anybody wants to check
yeah, but
it
he
out,
was the first president of Rotary. Tragically, the year he became president when they started the club in 1918, his wife and 2 children were killed in a railroad accident at where was it?
Park
Park
Avenue.
Avenue. Yeah, Park Avenue. And he was widowed and lost his whole family. It's tragic. I think that the story in the newspaper said that there were some veterans coming through on the railroad, so everybody in town wanted to kind of see this railroad, group of veterans coming through, because it was right at the end of the war. And the son was driving, and he turned the car around, not realizing that another train was coming, and killed all of them instantly. Imagine that tragedy right through that, but that's.
If you, next time you go across there, Park Avenue, look down both directions, and you can maybe see a quarter mile in each direction. Then you think about those steam trains, the passenger trains, like the 20th Century Limited used to go through Kenneville, 70 miles an hour. It's not going to take them long to get, once they're in sight, to be at that crossing. And the poor kid, he was probably not that experienced driving, but he had cars in front of him, cars behind. He had nowhere to go, and he tried to drive down the tracks, but unfortunately he didn't make it. But this album is my railroad and interurban things. But one of the things I have in there is a business card from CJ, or an envelope from CJ Mutton. And by then, the Chicago and Toledo interurban had been purchased by the Fort Wayne and Northwestern Railway Company. And he was kept on as the director here in Kendallville after that. But I have this, and this might have been one of the cards that Amanda and I were trying to outbid each other for. This is.
Oh yeah, that totally was.
This is the old Kenneville Depot. This is looking east toward Main Street, and the depot, Lincoln Street, came to an end just on the other side of the depot. And but this card was sent by Alice Munton to her grandmother, Mrs. J.W. Munton, in Morgan, Michigan. And Alice, this was about 2 years before she was killed in that car accident. But I believe it's the 1917 or maybe the 1918 Kenneville yearbook is dedicated in memory of Alice and her brother.
They had it in 1918.
And I've looked on Find a Grave, and I can find the mother's grave and Alice's, but for some reason her brother is not listed. And Clarence remarried, and I don't know if it was, he married a woman quite a bit younger than him. The marriage didn't last, but I don't know if that upset his wife's family or what. But when he passed away, he was a member of the Masons, the Masonic Lodge, and he lived his last few years at the Masonic home in Franklin, Indiana, and he's buried in the cemetery there. So he never got to be reunited in the cemetery with his family. And this is the old powerhouse that set where the north end of East Noble football field is now. And this is a pretty rare card. It's the only copy of this I've ever seen. And
And is the reason the hill is still there is because I believe the generators are there, buried in the dirt?
No, they're not. They're gone. No, this was built on top of the hill. You can still see part of the cement foundation there and out in the roadway. And when we were in high school, and maybe Terry remembers this, but I remember playing softball in phys ed class. And if you hit a ball hard enough, there was this large round cement thing out in the field. And it was the foundation for this chimney. Do you remember that? I remember.
Guyman Field.
Yeah, because I was into the history stuff even back then, because our dad would talk about when he was young, he would, this was the car barn, and they would store cars in there or work on them in there. When he was born in 1913, and so he was a teenager in the mid-20s, and this was very tempting for those kids because they could go in there, and the power was in the lines all the time. And they'd go there like in the evening, there might just be a watchman in the building or something, or or somebody feeding the boilers to keep the steam up to power the generators. But Dad and his friends would run cars in and out of it. And so I knew the history of it even back then. And Dad, it's hard to imagine our state poet laureate doing things like that when he was a kid, but these things happen.
When they put the new football field in, from lower to the upper part,
Yeah.
they found lots of foundations under there. I think they found a turntable under there. Because that football field is lower than the ball diamonds used to be, so they went down quite a ways. And I think some of that's in the paper from that era.
Yeah, I do have a postcard in here. This one was taken from the roof of that powerhouse, looking northeast, and it's labeled the electric way into Kenneville. And this is looking where the East Noble parking lot is now. You can see the tracks going here and where they cross Garden Street. And when they started out, for some reason, the city made them cross Dively Creek. So the tracks there crossed to the north side of Dively Creek and stayed that way for about 2 blocks. And then they turned and crossed the creek again, and to get to their station on South Main Street.
I remember right, the interurban closed in 1937.
Yes. These are all postcards of the interurban station, and that stood just north of Vine Street, or not Vine Street, Indian Street. And this large building was a grocery store and somebody's home, and then the interurban station. The building stood just about where the old driveway to Johnny Roman Ford used to be.
It went to Fort Wayne, is that right?
Yeah, from Fort Wayne, it came up past Irene Byron on 3 and went through Huntertown, right down to Main Street. Then it turned west and then came into Garrett from the south. And from the south, which I should have a map right here. Yeah, the track was Y-shaped. Fort Wayne down here in Huntertown, and Garrett in the center. And then it came to Avila, and then up here to Kendallville. And the other arm of the Y went through Auburn and up to Waterloo. And they called it the Toledo and Chicago Interurban because they had grand plans to complete that circuit so that somebody could go all the way from Chicago to Toledo. And from here, it only needed to go to Goshen, and from Waterloo, it only needed to go to Bryan, Ohio. But the interurban was doomed when Henry Ford built the Model T, the trucks and things. The automobiles and trucks put the interurban out of business. They couldn't compete with the railroads because they wanted to go right through the towns, and so they created traffic jams in towns. You know, they went right down the streets, and the railroads, you know, just kind of underbid them and helped them out of business. But it was really the local people having their own automobiles. Say you wanted to go to Fort Wayne, you know, so many people now could just hop in their car and go whenever they wanted. And although they did run a lot of cars, I believe that this timetable, there were probably excuse me, a dozen cars going to Fort Wayne each day. So, you know, every couple hours there was an interurban going or coming. But they just couldn't compete with the automobile local truck. I've got other things here. I've got some of the things I collect. Pictures from Kenneville photographers, Kenneville matchbooks, all kinds of ephemera. I've got stuff about the great race in 1908 from New York to Paris, including 3 postcards that were sent from Kenneville by one of the drivers in the race to his family in France. But it's
Probably the most famous auto race in world history. I have that story in my book too. One of the most, I mean, they came through Kendallville in a blizzard, and Mike can probably tell much more. One of the most interesting things is one of the cars, the French car, stayed overnight in Milwaukee at a bar, and overnight there was a robbery. They broke into the barn, and somebody stole $750 worth of goods from this. I mean, it was a camera and it was a rifle and things. It made like international news because little Milwaukee, Indiana, got on the map because of the theft of this car. They never figured it out, and they wrote up in the French newspapers.
They caught the kid.
They caught the kid.
Yeah,
I don't remember that.
But I've never found any information. I couldn't find a newspaper article other than stating that it was an 18-year-old kid who was arrested. But one of the things he stole was a movie camera, which at that time was worth, I think they paid about $2,000 for it, which was a tremendous amount of money in 1908. And I don't have it with me, but I do have a picture of this sawmill in Milwaukee where he buried the stolen goods on a pile of sawdust.
But this race began at Times Square in New York and ended up in Paris. I got a map here in the book to tell the story about all of this. And pretty interesting.
One interesting kind of local story is this. This is the Corona Hotel, which was maybe a block or two north of the railroad tracks in Corona. But the Thomas Flyer American crew pulled in there, and the driver was Montague Roberts, who was pretty much a rock star in 1908 America, because he was one of the very first really successful race car drivers. so he was famous. But they got there, and like Terry said, there'd been a blizzard raging all day long, and they went in and got rooms for the night, and they just had their supper, and they were relaxing in the parlor. And Montague Roberts leaned back in his chair and fell over backwards. His head hit the stovepipe, which they had the old-fashioned stove like we had when we were kids, right in the lady's parlor. He knocked that pipe out, and she had a roaring coal fire in there, and soot just flew everywhere. The whole room was black, and she threw them out into the blizzard. Said, "You blankety blank guys, get out of here." She said, "I'll have no more racers in my hotel." And so Montague Roberts turned to the other three guys that were with him and said, "Well, come on, boys. Kenneville's only 7 miles away. Let's go." And so they took off, but little did they realize it was going to take them 14 hours to go those 7 miles. They had this postcard was the one written by the French driver. He signed his name, Godard, on the front, which was evidently a French custom. And he sent this to his wife, and on the back of this, I had to have a French teacher because I didn't remember enough in my 2 years of French to translate this. And he says, "I can't believe how much snow there is. I've never seen anything like it. It's like a dream, 2 meters deep on each side of the road." 2 meters, that's over 6 feet. And so that's what they.
Another little story about Montague Roberts. He actually taught Franklin Roosevelt how to drive a car.
All right, let's go ahead and, there were a couple more people that were signed up. So did anybody else bring anything? Because I think a couple of them didn't show up. So I don't know, Karen, do you want to show your one? Karen, do you want to show your one more really cool item? And we could actually probably put it under the document camera so it kind of shows up. It might be a little big, but it might fit kind of so. Yeah, I think you
Lay it on that.
Upside down.
Upside down again.
There you go. There you go.
This is the tobacco cutter,
Okay.
so they would cut their tobacco with it.
Yeah, there were, back in the day, around 1900 to 1920s or whatever, there were probably half a dozen cigar makers in Kenneville.
One of the things one thing about Mike's cars, we were at the Apple Festival, I don't know how many years ago it was, and he said, "Power, you need to see this card." And
It's
I
probably,
don't know if you have it with you or
that's
not.
probably.
So we went into the merchant's building where all the antiques were, and he pulled his card out, and he said, "Whose writing does that look like?" And I said, "Well, that's Mom's." And this postcard was sent to her pen pal. I think he said it was like in Oregon.
It's the old Elks Temple, and I asked that lady. I says, "How did you get this card?" Because I had chills when I turned it over. I always thought maybe someday I'd find a card that someone in my family had written, and but when you go through school, you take your report card home every 6 weeks, and so I'd see Mom's name over and over and over again. And plus I have some letters that she wrote. There's not a doubt that Mom wrote this card. I asked the lady, how did you get that? And she says, well, my sister was an antique dealer in Oregon. And she, when she passed away, I flew out there to help her kids get rid of, all the inventory of her antique store. And I told them, I says, all the Midwest postcards I'll take home, because she says I'll have a better chance of selling them there than right out here. And so that was one of the cards that she brought. And Mom talks in here about, here are 3 view cards of our city of 6,000. Couldn't find any of the high school where I bought these. We'll look for one of it in another place today. But these ladies, you notice there's no name or address on this. What they would do, they would put the cards in an envelope, and then they could send it with just one stamp instead of sending all the cards individually, and save a little money. But I can remember her having pen pals when I was a kid. But that is definitely one of my prized cards.
Another thing I wanted to mention, you were talking about Dad run the trains in and out of the building and stuff. I remember he used to tell us that the old high school had from the 3rd story, had a fire escape on it. It was like a circular slide. Sure, building caught on fire and you're on the 3rd floor. For the 2nd floor, you could jump in there and slide down to the ground. And he used to tell us when he was a kid, him and his friends, after school was over with and it was all locked up, they would get up in that fire escape and work their way up, all the way up to the 2nd, 3rd floor. And they'd run around the building and stuff and that. He said they never did get caught, but he said that that's what one of their fun things that they used to do was to go into the high school building, because back then they were probably just in the elementary part back then, because he said they were young. Yeah, he was famous, but he never got caught by the law.
Infamous.
What a good note to switch to Amanda. I've been staring at the bottle this whole time, and that was a great segue with the law as well. What is this bottle, Amanda?
Okay, this is from Plankenberg's. I purchased this at an antique store. I don't mind if you guys like touch my stuff, so I'm just gonna make you guys look at it.
Don't drop it though, because you're on camera.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I have just some things from Plankenberg's. They have that big auction, and some of the stuff turns up now and then at antique stores or whatever, and I've been picking it up and buying it. I also have done some some stuff. Okay, I've done some research on the Gaffingers because my cousin actually owns a horse that my mom remembers seeing when she was growing up, and my aunts and uncles always talked about this, and then it got passed down to a cousin of mine. It's been at the Auburn Fair. I don't know if you remember there being like a giant display horse.
Oh.
Yeah, that's from Gaffinger's in Kenneville. So John Gaffinger was born in Wurtemberg in 1830. He went to tannery school there, so he learned how to tan leather. And then he boarded a ship for New York City, which took 58 days. He married Marguerite Moff in Ohio, and then he moved to Albion in 1857. In 1863, he moved to Kendallville and opened a harness and leather shop, which he operated for 30 years. He's the one who built the first brick building, and he owned the first oil lamp in all of Kendallville. In 1876, the business was valued at $49,000, which was a lot of money in 1876. He has helped establish the first waterworks in Kendallville. He died in 1893 And then his wife died in 1920, Marguerite, and then they had to settle the estate, which took 3 years, and ended up having a value in 1922 of $160,000. So it was the second largest estate ever in Northeast Indiana, was the Gaffinger estate. They had 9 children who split that estate. One of them, Amelia, was married to Paul Plankenberg. So it looks like she took part of her inheritance as the brick building where the harness shop was. And Paul started a drugstore there. He was the son of Prussian immigrants. Paul Plankenberg moved to Kendallville about 1887. He worked at Lohman's drugstore, which I mentioned earlier, for about a year, and then he opened his own drugstore. He had 3 children with Amelia, who died in 1911. Then he married Frederica Myers in 1912, and they had Robert Plankenberg in 1913. Bob started working with his father at a young age. He was that manager. In 1938, he married Cora Viola. Paul died in 1942. In 1938, Congress passed an act called the Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics Act, which was sort of the end of the patent medicine era. It made it illegal to sell any substance in which the ingredients were not easily identified. So, and then in 1951, any prescription drugs had to be sold by a licensed practitioner. So Bob did not have a license to carry on the pharmacy business. So he kept it as a soda fountain, and a lot of people have memories of Plankenberg's magazines, root beer barrels. One of the more interesting things that I learned about was a friend of mine was taking care of Bob when they were having his auction, and she said that she was there helping get things organized and cleaned up, and the DEA came in, or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, something like that, came in and cleared out a whole bunch of stuff from the basement. Because when Paul stopped compounding medicines, or when he died, or when he stopped, Bob just left everything in the basement. So I really wish I knew what it was they got.
I can tell you,
Oh, yeah?
I had the auction.
Oh, cool. What was it?
We actually, from the store, took all of the things out to the fairgrounds.
Okay.
And we filled, is that Medall Hall? Is that what the name of the exhibition building is? I don't remember. What's the big metal building as you go in? The fairgrounds.
In DeKalb or Noble?
And Noble.
Merchants Building.
The Merchants Building, yes. We filled that, and then the pavilion, the open pavilion where, I don't know my directions now, but just out to the side, we put all of the bottles and cans and everything in there. And it's the largest crowd I've ever had at an auction. We give out over 1,000 bid cards, which tells me there was probably 2,000 people there. And 10 minutes before the auction started, there was a guy there who was with the DEA that was there to buy fishing lures. He wasn't there for any other inspections. And he had come up to me and he said, now there's some things out in the pavilion that you shouldn't sell. And some of it had morphine. I mean, there was some bad chemicals in today's period. So I just so happened to have helping me an off-duty policeman from Kendallville, from Fort Wayne, who worked in the drug task force. And so they were buddies, you know, and so I had my crew go and take anything that had a bottle that had liquid or powder or any residue in it, and we put it in a trailer to seal it off, and then we ended up having the auction. And then afterwards, we had to deal with those things. And we had to have a chemical company come and dispose of all of those chemicals the proper way, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've been wondering about that for so long.
But there was a Plankenberg store. The Plankenberg family ran the store for 111 years until
Right.
Yeah.
Bob retired because of his health in the year 2000. And Bob died. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
He died in 2003 at the age of 90. Everybody has it. One of the cutest stories that I remember, the family story about Plankenberg. My little nephew from Maryland came and, I don't know, he was like 7 or 9 years old, but he went up to Plankenberg's and he saw all this cheap candy. He couldn't believe it. They were selling, he was still selling candy cigarettes, Anyway, my nephew bought up all this stuff. He was only like 7 or 9 years old. And he took it back to Maryland and, made a whole bunch of money because he thought it was, and he bought up all
Well,
this.
he put it in a wagon
Yeah, he
and
put it
went
in a
around the neighborhood and sold it, and he had the candy cigarettes.
He was a businessman.
Apparently, yeah,
Yeah,
and in his neighborhood, they wouldn't sell candy cigarettes, whatever.
My favorite Plankenberg story was Bob and my father were both born in 1913, so they were lifelong friends. And but our dad used to take Howard and I up to the Strand Theater to watch like Disney movies, something like that, on Friday nights. And we'd get out of there after dark, and we'd start walking home, and we'd get from the Strand to Klinkenberg's. And Bob would be sitting there at the counter in the dark, and he would come and unlock the door and let us in, and he'd lock the door behind us. And he and Dad would sit there and tell stories. And but he always got Howard and I each a big mug of root beer out of that barrel. And we'd sit there and look at comic books or something by the street light and drink our root beer. But I wish I'd give anything if I'd have had some way back then to record Dad and Bob telling those stories, when they were kids, all that.
I remember you used to be able to get cherry cokes there, and it was the old type where you put we'd get to where we knew that if we were talking to him when he was putting the cherry in the bottom of it, he'd forget how many pumps he put in there. So you could get an extra pump or two of cherry and coke. Cherry in there, then he'd add the coke and whatever it was, phosphate or whatever, and stir that up. So if you caught him just right, you could have like a double cherry coke.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure to show off some of the stuff, the medicine labels and everything of the Plankenbergs that I have. Because everybody has such good memories. My mom remembers going to Plankenbergs when she was a kid. She grew up, and then I grew up in the same house, way out in the country between Ashley and Corona. So my grandfather worked at Flint and Walling, and sometimes every once in a while, if she was really good and they had an extra $1 or something, she was able to go to Plankenbergs. The other thing I brought stuff is I really love the Strand Theater, and part of it is because that's where I got married in 2006. And so I've been slowly collecting memorabilia from the Strand. So it started as the Spencer Opera House. There we go. In 1890, it was built by Edward B. Spencer, who was born in 1823, moved to Albion in 1838, married Emily Wheeler, who was a teacher at the first school in Kenneville. He was actually a builder and a contractor. He sort of just happened to get into the opera house business. In 1873, he moved to Kenneville because he was contracted to build the Trinity United Methodist Church. In 1890, he built himself the Spencer Opera House for $29,000. The first play was September 1890. It was called Edmund Kean, and he ran it until 1894. So this is a program from 1891 of the Fairy Grotto. Then in 1892, I don't know if there were any other funerals, but in 1892 there was a funeral at the Opera House. Hiram Iddings on January 17th, 1892. Probably because so many people wanted to attend. In 1905, it was bought by Albert and Elizabeth Thomas Boyer, and it was called the Boyer Opera House. They added moving pictures in 1909. They closed during World War I, and then in 1919 they reopened as only a movie theater, and it was managed by Bert and Anna Rulo Deardoff. In 1928, Albert Boyer died, and it was sold to Robert Hudson, which he owned Hudson Entertainment Incorporated from Richmond, Indiana, and that company also owned the Colonial and the Princess Theaters. So I have some tickets from this era. So this is from 1939. If you were to see all the chapters of The Lone Ranger Rides Again. And then this one, which is for the Strand or the Princess. It's in 1938. It's a free ticket that somebody held on to. The paper is so thin and soft. It has to stay in this plastic case or it falls apart. And then I have these. It was a fundraiser in 1933 for the Municipal Soup Kitchen. And then there's a ticket stub for the balcony. I'm not sure when that one was from. In 1952, Hudson Entertainment Incorporated added the Highview Theater. Here's like the Strand and the Highview, the Strand 2. In 1853, the front, the marquee, was remodeled by A.M. Strauss. And in 1980, it was split into 2 screens. In 2014, they did the Keep the Light On campaign to raise money for a new digital projector. And it was recently purchased by new owners that I forgot to write down their names. So I have 2 more Strand-related things. This is from 1908. It is the 29th annual reunion of the 44th Indiana Infantry. And it is taken in front of, it would have been 1908, so that would have been the Boyer Opera House. So this is a reunion of a Civil War infantry. But you can see some of the theater posters.
While she's showing that around, I'd just like to say, if you ever get a chance to go to one of Amanda's cemetery tours, or any of her other programs, she is just amazing. She blows me away with the research that she does and the knowledge that she ends up with on all these things.
And she's not a native of Kenneville, that's why.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amanda, can you tell a little what you're doing with the Virtual History Museum too?
Oh, sure. So a lot of the stuff that's like this, that's sort of in people's private collections, because we don't have a museum dedicated specifically to Kenneville, and a lot of people want to keep a hold of their own stuff. We have a virtual history museum that Mike and I are doing, and we are taking submissions. If you send me a picture of something that you have that is Kenneville related, we're putting it up as a virtual history picture repository.
On Facebook, right?
On Facebook, yes. And it is officially affiliated with the Kenneville Heritage Association.
And what's the Kendall Heritage Association?
Thanks, Jill. It is like a historical society for Kenneville. I forgot what year this was. I bought this on eBay. If somebody just looks up one of these, the Santa Fe Trail. No, it doesn't.
Can I add one thing about this strain? I interviewed Play on Point for my book, but this is interesting. I'll ask you, the biggest drawing movie in the Strand's history, this is Cleon, so I don't know how accurate it is, was what, in 1959? Anyone want to guess? 1959?
Something to do with Elvis.
Oh, no, not quite. Yeah. Well, I guess Amanda knows, huh?
I know.
Oh, go ahead.
Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hur.
What was the modern facade put on it?
52 or 53. And it was by Ames Strauss, who's the architect that's originally from Kenneville. His practice was in Fort Wayne. He designed the part of the ACD building that is now the museum, the Lincoln Bank Tower in Fort Wayne, the Embassy Theater. He did all of those things. I mean, so many things. But
He's in my picture too.
Yep.
I was going to add a little to that later.
Yeah, I mean, he's a really, really awesome guy. So, okay, that's what I brought. Oh, real quick, my mom got me a present. She's been working on trying to get this for me for about 6 years. It is a picture of Kenneville's first mayor in his Civil War uniform.
Ooh.
Nice.
I don't think anyone has ever seen that before.
The
mayor, Hanshu was looking for that one. 2000. Wow.
Yeah. She's been working a really hard, long time to try to get this, and finally she was able to get it traded. A random other soldier she had that was identified, the guy traded her for this one, because she knew I wanted it. So he was in Company C of the 30th Indiana Volunteer Infantry. He was also in Company B of the 12th Volunteer Cavalry, and he was a captain. So this is Timothy Baker.
Can you put it in?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And what was his name? I'm sorry.
Timothy Baker. So,
Probably.
there was a
No, I'm sorry.
family.
I do have a picture.
Okay, cool.
But not as a soldier.
So the Baker family moved to Noble County in 1836. They were a combined family, so like yours, mine, ours kind of thing. So it was like Matthew Mott and a few of the Motts. Matthew Mott is the one who wrote the history of the regulators in Northeast Indiana. Or I don't think I got that right. And then there were a whole bunch of Bakers, and then the first night that they stayed here in Noble County, it was in Lisbon, and their horses were stolen. And so that sort of got a lot of the Bakers on the track of trying to hunt down horse thieves. They were really involved in that, and that's what Matthew Mott wrote about. So Matthew Mott is either Tim Baker's half-brother or step-brother, I'm not sure which one. But.
In case anybody
Oh.
doesn't know what the Strand Theater, what it originally looked like, it had this pyramid-shaped thing at the front or at the top. If you go behind the theater, like back to beer holders or a young family funeral home now, and look up at the back side of that, you can still see this behind the rectangular facade that's there now. But there's a little sign, which you can't read, but sticking out above the arched doorway there, and that says the Toledo and Chicago Interurban Company. You know, the station was down Main Street, several blocks, but their business offices were in this building, which you'd go through the door, you know, and then you'd have like a hallway going back to where the theater was, and they sold or rented out office space. Johnson Floral Company was on this side for many, many years. I think they were still there into the 40s, maybe the early 50s.
Well, and I just read today that the Johnson's greenhouse was right behind the Spencer house.
That could be, it was back on, I believe it's Water Street.
Water Street, yeah.
Yeah. I've got several postcards of the greenhouse. One other thing, Terry and I were talking about this before. These are baseball team pictures. They're from 1908 to 1911, the postcards. But one thing that Terry and I have wondered about is where this stadium, or I guess you could call it a stadium, whatever it was called Waterhouse Park with, what was his first name? Waterhouse? Clarence Waterhouse. Owned the big brick building.
Oh, Chauncey.
That's right.
Chauncey,
That's right.
yeah.
Chauncey.
Yeah, that's right. Owned that big brick building. It used to be at the corner of Amy Road and State Road 3, which unfortunately had been torn down. But he owned almost all the land north of 6 back in that day. He was one of the largest and biggest farmers in Nipple County. But he gave land for this baseball field, and that they built that grandstand there. But we don't know exactly where it was. You know, Terry has heard that it was north of where Mike is. We don't know for sure. We've never found it on any maps or anything. So if anybody has any information or knowledge about that.
I hate this. Time is going so fast. I think we unfortunately have only time for each person to show one more thing, because I know there's like really good stuff that everyone has brought, so I'm really hoping that we do this again. But mostly I really need to know what's in Bill's yellow bowl, because he made me carry it and he said it was like the most, I can't remember, but he scared me. He's like, I'm gonna have you carry it because I don't want to. So let's each do one more item or story, and then I would really hope we can schedule another one, because we could go on till like probably midnight, but we will not. So Bill.
Okay. I guess for me, being from the museum, and I'm sure you've all heard the show Mysteries at the Museum. And so that's kind of what I've been talking about those. So this is my second one here. How many of you go to wherever you're going on vacation, and you go through their souvenir shop, and oh man, I go through those, I look at those, and I gotta get a souvenir. I gotta get a souvenir. Talk about your book there, it says Centennial. You know, you had the coins, whoever had the coins made in Kenneville. And so I was a sucker for one of those, and I'm usually a sucker for 2 and something like that. And so I like my little souvenirs. So here is a souvenir that probably a lot of you may know what it is. I don't know those that don't. Right here it is. It's a little thing made of seashells. So there's 3 words on it. And one of those words is souvenir. So with your help here, and how many of you know now, don't say what, but raise your hand if you know what it is. Really? Okay, Amanda, surely you know. Okay. So this souvenir, I want you to try and tell me what the other 2 words on that souvenir say. Let's see if we can figure it out by the time we're done here. So this souvenir really belongs at timeline. The story of this thing here has another story to it, I guess. And so that timeline, I better get on that side of the table so I'll get this in the right direction. So this thing starts in 1867. It finishes up in 1907, the timeline of this piece. And where this piece really belongs, slide it over about right there. Another little thing I brought for this simple timeline, this should be the giveaway right here. One of these hacksaw blades. your hacksaw blades. Those go about right here. Any takers yet on what that may be? Nothing yet, okay. I got 2 pages of notes here. I thought surely someone would know something by now. Anyway. 1867, these hacksaw blades are about 1884 is where they come into play. This here, the age of this is around 1892 to 1905 is when that was made or put in that souvenir shop to sell. And so, big gap of time in between here that we'll hit some of those facts, I guess, but Marvin used to sell those. Marvin was a guy from, now you know.
Marvin Coon.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
This
So-
is pretty amazing.
All right, so there, he just let the cat out of the bag
Sorry,
there. No, Marvin Coons sold these in the souvenir shop of where? So what are those 2 words on there? So those 2 words are Ohio Penitentiary.
Oh.
So Marvin worked in the souvenir shop. He was a very good model prisoner in the Ohio Penitentiary. I'm going to simply go off the cuff now here. But that was towards the end of Marvin's life. What was he doing in the penitentiary around 1900? So we talked about, this is when Marvin was born in 1867. Marvin was born in around Wolf Lake. He grew up around Green Township. And Marvin, at age 14, landed in jail in Nipple County for stealing clothes from the hardware store in Wolf Lake. He was sent to boys' school. The judge happened to be in town and got sent to the boys' school. They took him to the boys' school, and he was too young for the boys' school. They sent him back. And so he spent 4 or 5 days in jail, and that was it at 14 years old. At 17 years old, he began to learn his trade a little more. And so by his trade, I mean, he was brought up stealing horses. So he liked to steal horses. So Marvin would be like a chop shop, I guess, for stealing cars. He'd get that brown horse from someone, and he would take it to the garage and give it a shoe shine, and that horse may come out black on the other way, and in the evening, he took off for Ohio. And so, how did he learn all this trade? Well, when he went to school, to jail the second time, I forget exactly what that was for, but he got in trouble. Like it was public intoxication and whatever. But he got thrown in a cell with another guy, and I don't think I have his name, but anyway, they talked a lot. They talked a lot about horse stealing. And make shorter story here. Marvin's brother brought him some hacksaw blades. Marvin was another good guy, and the whole thing of it is we don't condone his actions, but he was very well liked in the community. And so anyway, he got some hacksaw blades. Because of his being nice, they let him walk around the outside of the jail of the cell block. There's a catwalk there. And so that exposes you to the outside bars. And we can still see there's conflicting stories. I've found a lot of conflicting stories. I'm not going to say a lot of dates here, but the story is they sawed out the bars on the second floor of the jail, but there's actually a repair job on the bars on the first floor of the jail. And that's what I tell people. That's where he sawed out a couple bars and got away.
This is, I'm sorry, the Noble County Jail.
The Noble County Jail, yes. And so his partner that he learned his horse stealing trade went with him. They saw 2 bars. Marvin got out. They should have saw 3 bars. His buddy got out, and but he left a few patches of skin, I guess, on the jagged edges of the bars. But so off he went, and his life of crime was stealing horses, getting in trouble different ways. But what do you do to land yourself in the Ohio penitentiary? So he, one of his other cohorts, I guess, so to speak, was a guy named William Campow, and he was found dead over in Montpelier, Ohio, I guess it was. And so they accused Marvin of that. So Marvin ended up going to trial for that and found guilty, and was sent to prison in 1890, around in there, convicted in 1891. And so for 9 years he was in jail. So real short addition to the story, conflicting stories. While he's being chased around for this murder and everything else, he's found in Churubusco, and the Fort Wayne cop and a other security person, whatever, were hunting him down, and found him in Churubusco. Anyway, ended up being a shootout, and one story says the Fort Wayne cop got shot 6 times, and Marvin got shot 6 times. In another story, the cop got shot 3 times, and Marvin got shot 7 times. They both lived. They both lived. And so, anyway, down the road, convicted of this murder, his wife at the time is fighting to get him out. He's innocent. He just couldn't have done this. The folk around Nipple County here thought that he was innocent. So anyway, in 1905, he gets parole from prison, and you have a lot of parole meeting or whatever that is. And so you have people testify for or against. Who was one of the people that testified in his defense and for him that just knew he was innocent? The Fort Wayne cop. He was innocent. So that says something back then. Then, from the very end of the story, we got, this was 1905 is when he was released from prison. 1907, he was back to his old ways and died in a shootout in Van Wert, Ohio. And so he is, they had a big funeral, a lot of people attended his funeral, and died from stealing horses in Noble County on his way to Ohio, I should say. Same old story, he didn't learn. And so that's the life of times of Marvin Kumas. He's buried in the Wolf Lake Cemetery. His tombstone is there. His wife's name is on there too, but there's no date of her being buried there. So it is just Marvin in that grave there in the Wolf Lake Cemetery. So that's my little souvenir.
Did they have any children?
I believe they did, yes. I think a couple. Yes. So, yeah.
Tell how the name is spelled, because there's different families. Kumas.
Kuhns.
Do you know what part of Green Township you
The foundation.
Green Township.
Well, you're supposed to know that.
I don't know that.
I just found this out. I think it's 5 or 10 or 15-year-old news that the foundation of the house is still in the state park.
Oh, in the state.
In the state park, around there, that it's supposedly in there. Yeah. There's more information on where exactly it was, but I don't have it with me now.
That's interesting. It's not from the state.
Oh, you better go look.
Close to, yeah.
It was interesting that you said The Life and Times of Marvin Kumas, because that was the name of a book published in Kenneville in 1908 or 1909.
Yep, I've got a copy of that book. The museum's got a copy of that book. then it was reprinted in a shorter version.
The media loved this story, and all the newspapers wrote it. And his wife gave wonderful interviews.
Yes.
They're all written up.
And Bob Gagan, who had the,
Bob did a wonderful job.
my mother collected all this stuff too, and so, yeah, I've got a pretty thick file on Marvin Kumas at home, a lot through Bob Gagan.
And I was in charge of digitizing the John Martin Smith collection for the Eckerd Library. And one of the things that we had was a letter from the Jefferson Township Horse Thief Detective Association. And it was to a sheriff in Ohio talking about sending somebody there to recover a wagon and horses that Marvin had stolen and taken to Ohio. He was captured over there.
Yep, that's Marvin. Old McCray, I really appreciate your sign. I have a DVD or an old 8mm film of a tour of that hospital in 1956. My grandpa was running the movie camera. They let him go all through the hospital and in the maternity ward and
I might have been there.
You're older than that.
They let him in the operating
Or
room.
April 22nd, 56.
And he was even taking his camera into the operating room. And I know it was around 1956 because his 1956 Thunderbird was out in the parking lot. And my grandpa was a doctor, just you know, folk know. Yes, yep. So that's a pretty neat sign for that. That's all I've got.
Real quick, I have a collection. Everybody know who Ford Frick was? I think so. Noble County's one of Noble County's most famous natives, but he was a baseball commissioner. Actually, he was born in Milwaukee. Family moved to Broomfield. He graduated from Rome City High School, and he was actually a newspaper man and went to New York. So here's a collection of some things. He became president of the National League in 1934. And this is a baseball magazine announcing that he was the president of the National League. Then he became commissioner in 1951 through 1965. And anyway, there's several things. Here's a picture of him giving President Truman a season pass to the National League. This is the American League president, the National League president here. Here he is in 1965 when he was named to the Hall of Fame. But one of the more interesting things, and I have some autographs and I have some bats here. Here's a autograph picture of Whitey Ford and Ford Frick together. Both of their signatures are on this. Here's a little gift that Ford Frick gave out as says compliments of Ford Frick, president of the National League, 1944. This is the schedule of all the National League teams, all their games. So we didn't have the internet back in 1944. You had to get that. Another autograph. This is actually the bat when he was the guys named to the Hall of Fame in 1970. All their names are on here. Ford Frick. Some of these you may not know. Jesse Haynes, who pitched for the New York Yankees. Lou Boudreau, that's a name you probably remember. Lou Boudreau played for the Cleveland Indians and he managed the Chicago Cubs once and became an announcer. I think everybody remembers that. So this is sort of a fun collection. One of the neatest things that I have here, and I didn't put this in the frame because it's has his signature on the back, but it's a badge. It says Madison Square Garden International 6-Day Cycle Race. It says Working Press. So this is his press badge. On the back of it, he signed it. Ford Frick, the Evening Journal. He worked for the New York Evening Journal. But there's a date on this. Maybe somebody can remember why this date is important in history. I'll give you this. March 4th, 1933 was the day of this working press. March 4th, that's actually my wife was born on March 4th. 20 years later. But March 4th, 1933, anybody know? What happened on March 4th? The president was inaugurated then, back in those days, until the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. All the presidents were inaugurated on March 4th. So Franklin D. Roosevelt was inaugurated on March 4th, 1933. And I have Ford Frick's. So Ford Frick wasn't at the inauguration. He was at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Anyway, it's fun to collect. If you ever get a chance, has anybody been to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York? Fabulous place. And I was there a couple of years ago, and I went to their library. They let me look at all the Ford Frick memorabilia that they have in files there. And I was doing a story about Frick, and there's actually an author who's doing another book about Frick that should be coming out in a couple of years. But anyway, I just thought I'd share a little bit about Ford Frick. Yeah, you know, there are lots of people in Kenneville. The Fricks, Harold, does anybody remember Harold Frick? He was a distant cousin, but you know, in Brookville they had a lumber yard. But Harold would get tickets to the World Series. Ford Frick would make sure he got tickets. But it's interesting. Frick, I'll take just one more minute. I wrote a story because Frick wrote an autobiography, which is very interesting. But I pulled the story out of his book about the world champion Chicago Cubs playing a game in Kendallville. Actually, I think that was a fictitious story. I wrote this up based on what Ford Frick wrote in his book, that the Cubs came to Kendallville in 1907. The Cubs won the World Series in 1907 and 1908, and Frick writes about them, and he has a whole story here about the Plymouth. I have looked in every newspaper, but the ironic thing is, and I'm a Chicago White Sox fan, so I can tell this with pride, the Chicago White Sox in 1912 actually did come to Kendallville, and I wrote that story. I found that out later after I wrote it in a column. And they say in the 1912 story that no other major league team had ever played in Kendallville. I don't think Frick made that story up, so this story here probably is not accurate. Who knows? Maybe I'll find some other. But the story in 1912 said there had never been a baseball team come to Kendallville, but they played at that Waterhouse, the White Sox in 1912. So I've said enough.
I've also searched hundreds of old Kenneville newspapers, and I could never find anything about the Cubs playing there.
Oh, thanks.
That I did.
What a mystery. But that was not uncommon sometimes. People would stretch stories. It was a wonderful story that he told about all of these players. Like, he showed up as a young kid at the gate. He didn't have a ticket for this game in Kendallville. And one of the famous Chicago Cubs players said, "Hey, take my shoes," and he put them on his shoulder, and walked him in, and he sat there and watched the game. It's a great story that he wrote in his book, but I'm not sure that's true.
I did find an article where the Waterhouse Park added maybe
I think 2000.
2,000 seats one summer. And Terry and I think that was probably for that White Sox. But another thing that I've collected, through my research, I found there were 22 photographers in Kendallville from the early 1860s to around 1920. And I just kind of made it a goal trying to find samples of all their work. And of those 22, I have photographs from 19 of them. Three of them I haven't found anything yet. These are a couple of them. There's a really nice, real dapper gentleman. And that's a crowfoot. And I'm sure Amanda could tell us more about crowfoot because I think that's one of her favorite photographers to collect. And also, if she could take any one of my photographs, she would take this one. This is by Harkless, is the name of the photographer. And it's a real charming photograph of a young woman in a window talking to a young man on the outside. But Harkless was mainly Alvin, and I did not consider him a Kenneville photographer for a lot of years until I found this card, and this one says Alvin and Kenneville. So he must have had a studio in Kenneville for a short time at least.
Was there a photographer that was above Plankenberg's store?
Oh, yeah.
But,
I think so. Yeah. I think it was like,
I think it was Frank Myers,
oh, was it?
201 and a half something.
So why does she want that card so much?
Oh, it's just pretty.
We have a lot of the same interests collecting these.
Yeah, I have, last time I counted, I had 140 portraits by Kendallville photographers.
I don't have nearly that many.
I can't leave them in an antique store. If it says Kenneville, I buy it, and I don't know why. It's
That's the way I feel about my collecting, all this stuff. I feel like I'm bringing it home. And, 'cause, some of the stuff I've bought from Europe, and a lot of it's been from California, Oregon, and the state of Washington. But,
So do you have any of the photographs that you
Oh yeah, we might have to set up a trade.
I'll run it.
I have a Harkless, so we can trade a Harkless for a Harkless.
But the three I don't have, there was a Love Ridge in 1863, and Maurice Grove, which it seems like I've seen those, but I don't know him. He was here in 1908. And then there was a Harvey Smith in 1874. But I've got several, a few.
And that first one, it would have been ambrotypes. It would have been ambrotypes, so they wouldn't be marked.
But it's possible I have some then, because
Yeah.
I've got some unmarked that were in a Kendall album. But I do have several from the Civil War era.
I already talked about all my stuff. I have a book of random if anybody wants to look through it. It's literally random. I don't have any organizational strategies, so.
Because it's all in your mind. You
Yeah.
remember everything. You just, your stories.
I've told Jill multiple times, she'll ask me if I know certain people here in town, and I'll go, no, all the people I know in Kenneville are dead. I can tell you their first names and their last names and where they're buried and all this, but I don't know anybody who's alive.
I see Dr. Gaffinger, and one of the persons in this 1914 picture was Doc Harold O. Williams. And there were actually 4 generations of the Williams family who served as physicians in Kenneville, which is kind of really remarkable, from 19th century to the mid 20th century. And the first Doc Williams came to Kenneville in 1865. And then his son and his grandson, great-grandson, Harold, does anybody remember Harold Williams? He actually delivered me in this building. He died in 1957, but that's, you can imagine, 4 generations of medical doctors, so the same family. And he had, I think his office above Main Street. Many of these doctors who have their doctor's offices, above there.
William Street?
No, William, it's William Street, William Mitchell. That's unfortunately, over the years, that got changed. Russell Frazee, that was one of his pet peeves.
Well, it's all been
Changed.
changed back now.
I
None
think-
of, none
I
of the
think all
street
the-
signs say Williams.
Yeah, all the street
They all
signs,
say William.
because of Russell made sure
Yeah.
that we did. Although some of the addresses I still see said
Yeah.
Williams, but it's not Williams.
What happened to Russell's, all of his great things?
Well, fortunately, it was all donated to the public library. Leah, you want to mention?
Yeah, so I don't know if you all have been upstairs to the Russell Frazee Center, it's our little history genealogy room, so you can come in anytime and look through a lot of it. Not all of it is fully cataloged, but I know that Ann Butterfield is here, and Ann does so much work volunteering for us, and she knows a lot about that, and she can probably help find exactly what you're looking for. Right, Ann, no pressure?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
Well, one of the things that Russell told me, which I think is really interesting, you know where the old, the old post office is on Mitchell Street? And drive by there sometime, you'll see a big walnut tree, huge, the most beautiful tree in Kenneville. He said there was a picture from the Civil War era, and that tree is in that picture from the Civil War, 1860s. You know, there was an encampment there in that area. There's a picture. So next time you go around there, look at that tree. It's still gorgeous.
Tornado thing came out.
Oh yeah, it's had some branches, but it's in good shape so far.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'm really hopeful that we will be able to talk our panelists into maybe coming